This piece is using a Google Street View as reference, and if you look at it, it's just delightfully bland, which makes it perfect for this exercise. Usually when people talk about stylization in an illustration, they are talking about posing and anatomy. But here, I want to talk about how you can push color and perspective to capture a stronger mood and make more impactful paintings. So get a small cup of coffee or wine since we are going to Paris. And let's level up our illustration skills, because these two ideas have completely changed not just the way that I paint, but even the planning stage before I even start working. And I'm sure that these lessons will also open up new creative possibilities for you as well. And I'm excited to see what you make after seeing this video. When we think about grass, blue skies, or white clouds, those elements are tied to strong color symbols in our minds. Beginner artists often take those color symbols very literally. They paint green grass, they paint white clouds. But there's actually a pretty simple way to fix this mistake that usually results in a very flat-looking paintings. Most Google Street Views are mostly shot during the day. Let's remember that these crappy 360 cameras would look even worse during nighttime and you could see nothing basically. At least all the ones that I have randomly hopped into have this very middle of the day, very bland lighting. In flat lighting like this, it's even easier to fall into a trap of color symbols. So that's why this point is so important. Before even starting a painting, we have to choose what kind of mood, what kind of time of day we are going for in this painting. Otherwise, all our paintings based on Google Street Views will have that same flat lighting in all of them, and that's not going to produce very engaging or interesting work. As an art teacher, based on my experience running concept art classes, I can say pretty confidently that there is no better exercise for learning color than limiting the hue range of your painting. Sticking to the same colors can be an easy way to truly create mood in your painting. And the reason for this is pretty simple. This instantly cuts that chain between the color symbol in your mind attached to that material that you are painting and the right color that your actual painting in front of you really needs. So in practice, for this painting, I decided that since it's Pride Month, I could limit the colors into a single stripe of the pride flag. Since my art isn't like super gay most of the time, I thought that I could do a selection of paintings for each stripe of the pride flag. But this doesn't mean that all the colors need to be the exact same hue. It just means that the overall impression, when you zoom out or squint and look at this painting, that the overall impression should be purple. Limiting colors this way is also a super efficient way to know how to mix shadow and light versions of a color. And if you need more help with that, I have created this entire tutorial on showing the process of how you can do that for your paintings. Giving the entire scene an overall hue is also a way to push the color into something more. For this, we're going to use those color symbols that people attach to things like grass, clouds, and trees. We're going to use those symbols, but, and here is the important part, we are not going to actually paint those color symbols. We are just going to use their effect in the viewer's mind to our advantage when we are planning our colors. And here's how we actually do that. When we are painting trees, everybody is already seeing in their head that this bark is going to be brown, these sort of foliage masses, they are going to be green. But just for that reason, because those sort of color symbols in people's heads are so strong, we don't actually have to use those colors. We can use color relativity to use existing colors surrounding that foliage of that tree to use whatever color we want. So because I wanted the general impression to be purple, the actual colors here for the foliage are mostly blue. The skylight coming from above on these leaves, it's slightly greener, less saturated hue of blue, but it's still blue. To make the foliage read green, all we have to do is make sure that the sky surrounding it is more red than the color of these leaves. And by red, I just mean that it's pushed to the direction of the red, pushed to the direction of purples more than the foliage here. And when we go into the distance, those shadow colors in the foliage, they're actually desaturated purple. So just the shape is telling that this is a green object, but the color can be something entirely different. These color symbols are so strong in our head that they literally interfere with what our eyeballs are seeing and replacing them with those color symbols and injecting that information in there, even if it's not in the painting. In practice, when you have a color symbol element that you are working with, let's say for example a plane of grass, that everybody's going to assume that it's a green surface, then you look at the color wheel and see that on the color wheel next to that green hue we have yellow and then we have blue. So you can slide into either of these two directions quite far and people will still see that color as green, even though we are using something completely else to make your painting have a stronger mood. So that's how you stylize color. And of course, this is a sliding scale, so you can stylize the colors a little bit or just go completely crazy and have your own way of seeing things, depending on how far along the color wheel you slide those colors. And when you're working with light surfaces, the less saturated your surface is, the more you can push the color to be whatever you want based on the mood and the overall color in your scene. For example, my skin is less saturated than my shirt, and you can see that this blue light has a stronger impact on the tint of my skin than the color of this shirt. When it comes to planning, consider what color best serves your scene's mood. So don't make your colors crazy just for the sake of them being crazy. Have a purpose for them. This kind of color changing also needs to be consistent for every single material in your scene, otherwise the color relativity will fall apart. And even now, I have to say that doing these sort of changes can be really tricky and they are not visible in the blocking in phase. That's what makes them feel so difficult. Because if you look at this palette that I used for this painting, it's so monotone and dark. Every color and hue is so close to each other that when I'm blocking in, I can hardly see what I'm doing. This is probably not what you want to hear in a tutorial, but you need to have patience. I've learned that in this phase, the color relativity won't work yet. You need to block in the shapes and add quite a bit of light before you can see the relationships of color working in your scene. And the more of that information you have, the better the whole scene and the mood comes together. But it's not going to be there right away. I've learned that I need to work quite a long time before I start seeing the painting form there, because these sort of low contrast changes, they don't read when they are just big blocks next to each other, especially before adding lighting into the scene. So have patience when you're using this method. It's going to take some time, but it's worth it, I swear. A handy trick that you can use when working with a dark palette is to create a separate layer for the element that you are drawing in. For example, a shape of a tree, you can paint that with a crazy color like bright pink or yellow. That will make it much easier to see clearly what you are doing, and then later fill in that shape with the intended darker color. Even though it requires patience, it is worth it though. At least for me, whenever I get one of these color synergies working and I get one color looking like another color that it is not, I always feel like a color wizard, and it's always such a rush to get it working. And for that reason, I recommend just sticking with it, reading the painting and reacting to what it's telling you. Not thinking about the color symbols, but sticking to your rules of limited palette and figuring out the solution that way. That's where that learning is happening. That's why it's rewarding. Now let's talk about exaggerating perspective. In my perspective tutorial that you can see here, I made this statement that especially in one-point perspective scenes, vanishing point should not veer too far off the center area, to not make your perspective itself be the main point of your painting. When it comes to three-point perspective scenes with one vanishing point in the sky, that sky vanishing point should in most scenes be up very high, or your vertical lines will all turn into diagonals. However, just like with any composition rule, this also works both ways. So if you want your perspective to be one of your main points in the story, you can make it so. And here's an example of that. So if you push the perspective, for example, so that your central vanishing point line is not way up in space, but here or over here, then you have your entire element tilted towards that vanishing point. You can create more dynamic compositions, but this dynamic perspective has to be the point of your illustration. Otherwise, it becomes like this distracting backup singer that is just screaming in the background off key for no reason. And we don't want that. So when do we need these sort of crazy perspective distortions? For example, if you're doing an illustration of a Spider-Man jumping through buildings, then having this sort of skewed wide-angle perspective makes sense because it adds a lot of movement. But if that type of movement is not the point, then you're just adding more confusion for no reason. Here, the biggest visual hook is that there are these two competing diagonals. The trees are diagonal going towards that tower, and then the clouds continue that diagonal upwards. And the Eiffel Tower itself is mirroring that line, causing this other diagonal to answer that line. This creates a triangle of different diagonals, and that keeps the eye moving and introduces the rest of the illustration that way. Eiffel Tower is symmetrical, so it isn't tilted or diagonal. So the only way for me to achieve this is to use this wide field of view perspective to make a straight line tilt diagonally like this. Normally, if you zoom out and take a picture of the Eiffel Tower or any vertical element far off in the distance, we lose that distorted perspective. But if we do that here, we also lose the drama of the scale of this building. So that would be a story reason why you would want to use a skewed perspective that has a wide field of view like this. My one tip for practicing this technique is that before just using it on anything, try to come up with a story reason why this wild field of view angle would enhance the story that you are telling. Let's say that you're a small dog and you're looking up at a massive looking building, and the only way to show that scale difference is by using a wide field of view angle. If that's not your illustration's main objective, you can always push that sky vanishing point further up to the space so that all of your diagonals turn vertical lines again. When you're using vanishing points in Procreate, remember that you can just put two vanishing points, and when you're using drawing assist, the vertical lines will still lock automatically to straight lines. So you don't need to have a third vanishing point up in the sky if that is not important for the story of your illustration. Details can cause visual friction, but they can still be not that important. Have you ever found yourself adding too many details that just make the painting feel cluttered? Then this next tip is for you. These diagonal lines that are directing the gaze up and down, there the eye movement is really quick because there is not much for the eye to see on those pathways. They are like arrows. Details can create friction that can cause the eye to slow down, but that detail can also just be complete nonsense. It can be grouped together to be easier to process. And that is what this entire visual noise is here, where I have all the lights and little blobby brushstrokes in the middle area here. It's almost like a bokeh effect taken from a camera that you can't quite see like these balls of light as they merge together. This is probably just my own personal style thing, but in my paintings, I'm always looking for an excuse to do this sort of visual sparkly confetti on my paintings. And honestly, after all that careful planning of calculating color relationships and making sure that the perspective is designed to tell the story in my painting, this is my opportunity to just have fun and add some damn sprinkles, because let's be honest, that's most of my paintings, and this is what I love doing, and I'm not going to be apologizing for it. So when I'm doing these crazy sparkly blobs, that's me mentally just going like, woo! And that same thing happens in every painting. That's an angrymikko painting for you. And they're not supposed to be important, but they are causing that visual friction because there's so much of this shining light candy happening over here that I am slowing down the movement of the eye in this one portion of that triangle. And that can create interesting visual rhythm in your painting. If you look at the visual pathways, we have the eye moving fast, slow, fast, fast, slow. If you have an idea for a tutorial or an idea for a location where you want to go next, let me know in the comments below. I have to say that I tried to make a white random dog, but it looked so much like Vivi, so I thought that why fight this battle? Like, what do I have to gain by adding some other random dog than Vivi? Because Vivi is the queen and producer of this channel and she deserves her damn trip in Paris. If you want to learn more about color and perspective, make sure to check out those dedicated videos. I've linked them right in the pinned comment below, so you can easily dive deeper when you want to learn more. And hey, if you found this helpful, hit that like button and consider subscribing if you wanna be part of our next painting adventure. Let's paint more in the next video. Bye!